The sound of a Ferrari engine is designed to be aggressive, a mechanical scream that demands attention, a frequency engineered in a wind tunnel to assert dominance over everything in its path. But to me, standing in the driveway of the house I had built with my own hands 40 years ago, it didn't sound like engineering. It sounded like the roar of a predator coming to feed on the weak. My name is Elias Thorne, 82 years old. My spine is curved like a question mark, and my hands are stained permanently with the grease of a lifetime spent as a master mechanic. I don't move fast anymore. My knees click like dry gears, and my breath catches in the damp air. But my hands are steady. I was standing on the gravel, a rag in my hand, polishing the spokes of my 1938 Rene Hurst touring bicycle. It is a machine of understated elegance, a bicycle built when metal was meant to outlast the man riding it. The paint is dull, covered in a patina of age that looks like neglect to the untrained eye, but the mechanics are perfect. The chain glides like silk over glass. It was my silence, my therapy, my connection to a time when things were built to be fixed, not replaced. Then the world exploded in red. The Rosso Corsa beast tore into the driveway, tires crunching violently over the stone, scattering gravel onto my prized hydrangeas. The engine cut, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The driver's door opened, and my grandson, Julian, stepped out. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first 3 cars combined, a slim-fit Navy number that looked too tight in the shoulders. On his wrist sat a heavy gold watch that could feed a family for a year. Beside him, unfolding herself from the passenger seat like a bored cat, was his fiancée, Tara. She was a woman whose smile was as calibrated and cold as the air conditioning in a bank vault. They didn't look at me. They didn't say hello. They looked at the garage, my garage, the place where I had restored Mustangs and Jaguars for 30 years. "Move it, Gramps," Julian shouted, his voice projecting over the hood of the car without even turning his head to face me. "The beast needs the bay. We can't leave Italian engineering out in the rain." He wasn't asking, he was commanding. He tossed his keys in the air and caught them, walking past me as if I were a piece of landscaping. "The garage is full, Julian," I said, my voice quiet but firm, fighting the tremor that stress always triggers in my jaw.
"My workbench is set up." "Then move the lathe," Tara laughed, snapping her gum. She looked at my bicycle with a curl of her lip that suggested she had just stepped in something foul. "Honestly, Elias, why do you keep that thing? It's embarrassing. Look at it next to the Ferrari." "It's not a thing, Tara," I said, gripping the handlebars. "It's a Rene Hurst. I rode this across Europe after the war." "Nobody cares about your war stories, Gramps," Julian said, stopping at the garage keypad. He punched in the code, my code. "And nobody rides junk anymore." He slapped the roof of the Ferrari. 700 horsepower. That bicycle has what? He laughed at his own joke. Tara joined in, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Move the bike to the shed," Julian ordered, pointing to the rotting wooden structure at the back of the property line. "I need the space." "The shed leaks, Julian," I said. "The roof is gone." "The shed is fine for scrap metal," he countered, his eyes finally locked onto mine. They were cold, devoid of the warmth I remembered from when he was a boy sitting on my lap steering the tractor. "Either you put it in the shed, or I put it on the curb for the trash collectors on Tuesday. Your choice. You're living under my roof now, remember?" He wasn't technically right. The deed was still in my name, but he acted like the king of the castle. He knew I was too tired to fight him physically. He knew I depended on him for the grocery runs and the bills. I looked at the Ferrari. I looked at my bicycle. I looked at the grandson I had paid tuition for, the boy whose first bicycle I had built from scratch. "Fine," I whispered. I pushed the bike. The wheels glided silently over the wet grass, a stark contrast to the aggressive growl of his car. I felt the rain begin to fall, cold drops that mixed with the sweat on my forehead. I pushed my freedom into the dark, rotting shed that smelled of mildew and decay. I covered the bike with an old, stained blue tarp, tucking the edges in to protect the leather saddle from the drips I could already hear coming through the roof. As I walked back to the house, soaked to the bone, watching the warm yellow light of the kitchen where Julian and Tara were already pouring my wine, I felt the familiar burn of humiliation in my chest. It's a specific kind of pain, not sharp like a knife, but heavy like lead. It's the weight of being erased, while you are still standing there.
If you have ever been treated like a squatter in your own life, pushed into the margins by the very people you wiped noses and paid tuitions for, if you've ever looked at the people you fed and clothed only to realize they're waiting for you to expire so they can pawn your life, well, hit that subscribe button. Because I didn't yell, I didn't fight back, I didn't raise my fist to the sky. I just documented the disrespect in the ledger of my mind, and I promised myself that the balance would be paid. But the betrayal ran deeper than a parking spot. That evening, I sat in the kitchen. They allowed me to use the small breakfast table in the corner while they took over the formal dining room with a spread of takeout sushi. I could hear them laughing in the other room, the clinking of glasses, the carefree sounds of people who have never had to scrub grease from their fingernails to buy a loaf of bread. I was sorting through the mail that had piled up on the counter. Julian usually intercepted it, claiming he was handling the admin to help me out. But tonight, in his excitement over the car, he had been careless. A bank statement was sitting on the bottom of the pile, unopened. It was for the joint account I had at First National. I had added Julian to it 3 years ago, a safety measure in case I had a stroke or fell ill so he could pay for my care. It held the proceeds from the sale of my workshop business, my Social Security savings, the money from Martha's life insurance. It was my safety net. It was over 6 figures. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a sudden intuitive dread. I pulled out the paper. I put on my reading glasses, the plastic frames cracked and taped at the bridge. I looked at the balance. I blinked, cleaned the glasses, and looked again. 0. I felt the room spin. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my chair. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. I scanned the transaction history. A series of massive wire transfers. One to a luxury dealership, one to an insurance broker, one to a jeweler. The dates matched. The withdrawal date for $80,000 was last Tuesday. The delivery date of the Ferrari was today. He hadn't bought the car with his success. He hadn't bought it with his investments or his crypto or whatever nonsense he spouted to the neighbors. He had bought it with my survival. He had bought it with Martha's death benefit.
I looked up, staring at the closed door of the dining room. I could hear Julian's voice booming. She handles like a dream babe, 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. It's stunning, Jules, Tara cooed. They were eating my life. They were driving my funeral expenses. They were wearing my nursing home care on their wrists. The panic of a man who realizes he is destitute and dependent on wolves washed over me. I couldn't breathe. The air in the kitchen felt hot, suffused with the smell of their expensive cologne and the lingering scent of betrayal. I needed air. I needed clarity. I couldn't confront them yet. If I walked in there waving this paper, Julian would deny it, or worse, he would kick me out. With $400 to my name, I had nowhere to go. I was a hostage in the house I built. I stood up, folding the statement and shoving it deep into the pocket of my grease-stained work trousers. I grabbed my heavy raincoat from the hook by the back door. I walked out into the rain. I didn't go to the house. I went to the shed. I pulled the tarp off the Renee hearse. The bike gleamed dully in the beam of my flashlight. I ran my hand over the top tube, feeling the cold steel. It was sturdy. It was real. Unlike the boy inside, it had a core. I needed to clear my head. I couldn't stay here tonight. I wheeled the bike out into the mud. I swung my leg over the saddle, my joints protesting, but as soon as my feet hit the pedals, the memory of motion took over. I rode. I rode 3 miles in the dark, the rain lashing against my face, mixing with the hot tears of rage I finally let fall. I rode away from the Ferrari, away from the theft, away from the grandson who had looked me in the eye and called me a burden while stealing my future. I ended up in the industrial district, a place of brick and iron that the modern world had forgotten. I stopped in front of a small, unmarked workshop, tucked between a warehouse and a rusted fence. I knocked on the metal door. A moment later, a slot slid open. Eyes peered out. "White," a voice rasped. "I need your eyes, Sato," I said, shouting over the rain. The door groaned open. "Mr. Sato,
A reclusive antique restorer I had known for 40 years stood there wiping his hands on a rag. He was a man of few words, a genius who could date a piece of metal by the taste of the rust. He ushered me in. The workshop was warm, smelling of oil and sawdust. It was a sanctuary. "What do you need?" Sato asked, looking at my soaked coat.
They kicked it out of the garage, I said, wheeling the bike under the bright halogen work lights. Sato made a noise of disgust in his throat. He walked around the bike. He touched the handlebars. He frowned. "I have never looked closely at this one," Sato said. "You always kept it covered in the back of your shop." "I thought it was," I said. "I bought it from a farmer in France in 1950. Sato pulled a jeweler's loop from his pocket. He leaned in close to the seat post. He scraped away a tiny flake of dried mud with his fingernail. He went silent. He didn't speak for 10 minutes. He moved around the bike like a doctor examining a patient. He ran a magnet over the frame tubes. He talked the fenders. He checked the serial number against a dusty, leather-bound ledger he pulled from a safe. I stood there, shivering, dripping water onto the concrete floor. I asked. He looked up. His face was pale. His eyes were wide, filled with a reverence I had never seen in him. "Elias," he whispered. I asked. "No," Sato said, his voice trembling. "It's a René hearse," I said. "No," Sato corrected, standing up and wiping his brow. "This is not just a René hearse. The prototype built for the Concours de Machines in 1938. It was ridden by the master himself. It vanished during the occupation. It was thought to be melted down for shell casings by the Nazis. It is a Ghost, Elias." I stared at the bike. The dull paint. The scratched leather. Sato wrote a number on a piece of scrap paper. He slid it across the workbench, face down. "This is the conservative auction estimate," he said. I flipped the paper over. I looked at the number. I counted the zeros. My breath caught in my throat. $1,200,000. It was 7 figures. It was worth 3 Ferraris. It was worth the house. It was worth everything Julian had stolen from me and more. "My God," I whispered. Then, the realization hit me like a physical blow. Julian and Tara were planning an estate sale next weekend. I had heard them whispering about it. They wanted to clear out the junk before sending me to the state-run facility. Now that my money was gone, they were going to sell my tools. They were going to sell my furniture. And they were going to sell this bike. "They think it's trash," I said, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. Julian called it scrap metal. "We must secure it," Sato said, reaching for a lock. "Leave it here." "No," I said. I looked at the bike. I looked at the number on the paper. I thought about the bank statement in my pocket. I thought about the smirk on Tara's face and the way Julian had tossed his keys in the air. "Clean the mechanicals, Sato," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. "Grease the bearings, truing the wheels, but do not touch the paint. Leave the dirt, leave the rust on the surface." Sato asked, confused. "Not yet," I said. "They are having an estate sale on Saturday. They want to humiliate me." I ran my hand over the handlebars of the Phantom. "I need them to put a price tag on it," I said. "I need them to laugh at it one last time. And then—" Sato smiled, a slow, wicked expression that matched the fire starting to burn in my chest. "I will make the call to London in the morning," Sato said. I rode the bike back home an hour later. The rain had stopped. I pushed it back into the leaking shed. I covered it with the tarp. I walked into the house, dripping wet, and past the dining room where Julian and Tara were finishing a bottle of expensive red wine. "You're tracking mud, Gramps," Julian called out, not looking up from his phone. "I will," I said softly. I went to my room and lay in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the windows. I touched the pocket where the bank statement lay against my chest. They had stolen my past. They tried to steal my future, but they had forgotten to check the value of the present. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I didn't see the gray fog of despair. I saw the bright, shining chrome beneath the rust, and I smiled. The estate sale was a carnival of indignity, a public dissection of a life that was not yet finished being lived. To the strangers parking their muddy trucks on my lawn, it was just another Saturday bargain hunt, a chance to haggle over the bones of a household. But to me, sitting on a rusted folding chair by the garage door,
It was an autopsy performed without anesthesia. I watched a woman in a floral dress pick up Martha's sewing machine, the singer I had bought her for our 10th anniversary. She turned the wheel roughly, grinding the gears I had kept oiled for 40 years. $5, she shouted to the liquidator Julian had hired. Sold, the liquidator yelled back, not even looking up from his cash box. I flinched. $5. That machine had sewn Julian's first Halloween costume. It had hemmed the curtains in the nursery, and now it was being hauled away like scrap metal.
My grandson Julian stood in the center of the driveway, the ringmaster of this circus. He was wearing a fresh suit, a light gray linen number that looked pristine against the backdrop of the chaotic garage sale. He held a paper espresso cup in one hand and his phone in the other, ignoring the people trampling the flower beds. The Ferrari, the Rosso Corsa 488 he had bought with my life savings, was parked prominently on the front lawn. He had roped it off with velvet stanchions he must have rented, treating it like a museum exhibit. It gleamed in the sun, aggressive and loud, a symbol of his success that he was desperate to flaunt to the neighbors. "Shh," he snapped at a teenager who leaned too close to the fender. "That's ceramic coating." Tara was by his side, wearing sunglasses big enough to hide her lack of soul. She was managing the Venmo payments for the larger items, her thumbs flying across her screen, calculating the take. They were liquidating me. They were turning my history into cash to fuel their future, and they were doing it while I sat 10 feet away, invisible. My bicycle, the 1938 René Hearse, sat forlornly near the recycling bins. Mr. Sato had done his work perfectly. The bike looked terrible. The grease was dark and thick on the chain. The leather saddle looked cracked and dry, though I knew Sato had conditioned it from the underside to preserve its integrity. To the untrained eye, it was a piece of junk that had been dragged out of a rear. Julian had slapped a neon orange sticker on the top tube. $50 OBO. "Can't believe you haven't scrapped that tetanus trap yet," Julian sneered, walking past me to check on the Ferrari. He kicked the tire of the bike with his polished loafer. "It's embarrassing, Gramps. It ruins the aesthetic of the sale. People see the Ferrari, they think class." "Let it be, Julian," I said, staring at the gravel between my boots. "Maybe someone needs a ride." "Nobody rides junk, old man," he laughed, a cruel, barking sound. He turned to Tara. "If nobody buys it by noon, put it in the dumpster. I don't want to look at it anymore." "Consider it done," Tara said, snapping her gum. I gripped the armrests of my folding chair. The bank statement in my pocket felt heavy, burning against my chest. $412. That was what they had left me. They had stolen 80 years of security and were now mocking the only thing of value I had left. I checked my watch.
It was 10:55 a.m. Patience, I whispered to myself. At 11:00 a.m. exactly, the atmosphere in the driveway shifted. A sleek black sedan turned into the drive, navigating slowly through the maze of pickup trucks and minivans. It wasn't a local car. It was a Lincoln Continental with tinted windows and diplomatic plates. It moved with a silent, heavy authority that made people stop rummaging through boxes of old tools to watch. The car stopped right behind a Ferrari. The driver's door opened and Mr. Sato stepped out. He wasn't wearing his usual shop apron. He was dressed in a sharp three-piece charcoal suit, his silver hair slicked back. He looked distinguished, formidable. He walked around and opened the rear passenger door. A woman stepped out. She was tall, severe, and elegant, holding a leather portfolio. She wore white gloves. She looked like she had just stepped out of a boardroom in Geneva. They didn't look like estate sale scavengers. They looked like sharks entering a pool of minnows. Julian straightened up immediately. He adjusted his tie, his radar for money pinging wildly. He assumed they were wealthy collectors, perhaps drawn by the rumors of the estate sale, looking for hidden art or jewelry. "Welcome," Julian called out, putting on his best salesman smile, the one that didn't reach his eyes. He walked over, extending a hand. "Welcome, I'm Julian Thorne. This is my estate. We have some excellent mid-century furniture inside if you're interested." The woman ignored his hand. She scanned the driveway, her eyes passing over the tables of knickknacks with practiced indifference. "We are interested in the vehicle," the woman said. Her voice was crisp, carrying a clipped British accent that cut through the noise of the crowd like a scalpel. Julian beamed. He practically vibrated with ego. He turned and patted the hood of the Ferrari. "Ah, the 488, he said, his voice dropping an octave to sound more masculine. "She's a beauty, isn't she? Twin-turbo V8, Italian craftsmanship at its finest." He leaned against the car, posing. "Sadly, she's not for sale. This is my personal daily driver, but I appreciate the eye." The woman looked at the Ferrari. Her expression didn't change. It was a look of mild boredom, as if she were looking at a toaster. "Not the car," Mr. Sato said, his voice deep and dripping with disdain. He pointed a gloved finger past the bright red sports car. Julian blinked. He looked at the Ferrari.
Then he looked at the rusty, grime-covered bike leaning against the recycling bin. Then he looked back at the woman, confusion knitting his brow. He burst out laughing. It was a loud, braying sound that drew a crowd. Julian wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "You're joking, right?" "We are very serious," the woman said. Julian shook his head, grinning at Tara. "Okay, sure. Whatever floats your boat. You want the bike? Buddy, for you, it's $20. Take it. You're doing me a favor." The woman repeated. "I'm authorized to sell everything," Julian said, spreading his arms wide. "I'm the executor. I'm the boss. Take it. Hell, take it for 10. The woman nodded to Mr. Sato. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a document. "I am prepared to offer a consignment contract," she announced, her voice raising just enough so that the neighbors browsing the book table could hear. She turned to me. I hadn't moved from my chair. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "we have verified the provenance provided by Mr. Sato. We have checked the serial number against the 1938 concourse register." Julian interrupted, stepping forward. "What bid?" "It's a bike." The woman looked at Julian with pity. "This is not a bike, young man. The prototype built for the Concours des Machines in 1938. It features the original cantilever brakes and the ultra-lightweight tubing that was thought to be lost during the occupation." She turned back to me. The silence that followed was absolute. The wind in the trees sounded like a roar. A bird chirped, and it sounded like a scream. The neighbor holding a box of my old records dropped them. Crash! Julian's laugh died in his throat. His mouth hung open, a perfect O of stupidity. Tara dropped her phone on the pavement. The screen shattered, but she didn't look down. Julian stammered. His face went pale, the blood draining away so fast he looked like he might faint. "Million?" 1.2, the woman confirmed. "Likely to go higher at auction." Julian's eyes darted to the bike, the rusty, dirty bike he had kicked moments ago, the bike he had banished to the leaking shed. The greed rushed back into his face like a tidal wave. He lunged toward the woman. "Sold. I accept. Write the check to Julian Thorne." He reached for the bike, his hands shaking. "I knew it was special. I always said Gramps had hidden treasures." "Step away from the bicycle," I said. I stood up. I didn't need my cane.
I didn't need the chair. The rage that had been simmering in my gut for a week had solidified into a cold, hard pillar of strength. I walked over to the bike. I placed my hand on the leather saddle. It felt warm in the sun. "You didn't keep it safe, Julian," I said, my voice steady and amplified by the silence of the crowd. "You kicked it. You left it in the rain." "Gramps, don't be like that," Julian pleaded, sweating profusely. "We're a team. This is great news. We're rich. We can pay off the—" "You mean I can invest," I corrected him. Julian shrieked, his voice cracking. "I control the assets." "Actually," I said, pulling a folded document from my pocket, the one my lawyer had drafted yesterday. "Your power of attorney was contingent on my medical incapacitation, which Dr. Evans refused to sign off on yesterday because, contrary to your claims, I am not senile. I am just old." I turned to the appraiser. "Since the title of the house and its contents is still in the name of Elias Thorne, and since the power of attorney is void, the proceeds belong entirely to me." "Absolutely," the woman said, handing me the pen. "Sign here, Mr." Julian turned purple. The veins in his neck bulged. You knew. This is fraud. You let me think it was junk. That's my inheritance," I asked, stepping closer to him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled bank statement. I shoved it into his chest. "You stole my savings to buy a car, Julian," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You drained my life insurance. You emptied the emergency fund." I pointed at the Ferrari. "You laughed at this bike because it didn't roar. You laughed because it was old." I looked him in the eye. He shrank back, looking like a child caught stealing candy. "But this bike has value," I said. "It has history. It has integrity." I paused.
Julian stared at me. He looked at the neighbors, who were filming with their phones. He looked at Tara, who was slowly backing away toward the street, distancing herself from the blast radius. "Gramps, please," he whispered. "The car note, the insurance, I spent it all. I suggest you sell the Ferrari," I said coldly. Although, looking at the depreciation once you drive it off the lot, I signed the clipboard. Mr. Sato moved forward, lifting the bike with the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic. He loaded it into the back of the Lincoln, wrapping it in a velvet blanket.
"One more thing," I said, turning to the liquidator, who was still holding the cash box. "The sale is canceled. Everyone off my property." Tara shrieked from the sidewalk, "We have debts!" "Get off my lawn!" I roared. The crowd scattered. The neighbors hurried away, whispering excitedly. The liquidator packed up his table in record time. Jillian stood there, alone, next to his Ferrari. He kicked the tire, screaming at the sky, a primal sound of frustration and ruined entitlement. "Tara," he yelled. "And you're just a thief in a cheap suit," I said. I walked back into my house and locked the door. I went to the window and watched. Jillian was pacing. Tara was crying, calling an Uber. The Ferrari sat there, gleaming and useless, a monument to his stupidity. A week later, the Ferrari was repossessed. I sat in my newly renovated kitchen, paid for by the advance on the auction, and drank my coffee. I watched through the window as the tow truck backed into the driveway. A burly man hooked the chains to the axle of the Rosso Corsa beast. Jillian was there, watching from the sidewalk. He had been staying at a motel. He looked disheveled. He tried to argue with the driver, but the driver just handed him a clipboard and winched the car up. As the truck drove away, dragging his status symbol to the impound lot, Jillian looked up at the window. He saw me. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just raised my coffee mug in a silent toast. I kept the house. I invested the auction money in a trust that Jillian couldn't touch. I bought a sensible sedan for rainy days, but mostly I walked. I walked to the store. I walked to the park. I walked with my head high, listening to the wind in the trees, knowing that the rust on the outside doesn't determine the value within. They had chased the flash and lost the gold, and I had ridden the rust straight to freedom.